afternoon. Welcome to Cleveland Theater Stories. My name is Brian Bowers. Now, you won't be hearing any theater stories from me. First of all, mine are pretty inappropriate for the stage, and frankly, you all haven't had enough to drink. Instead, I am your James Lipton for the afternoon, and we will hear from the Sid Cesear and Imogene Coca of the Cleveland theater world, Ron Newell and Lee Mackey.
I've always wanted to do Imogene.
Haven't we all?
Yes.
Ron Newell has credits in film, TV, scenic design, and directing, but he's most well known as a Cleveland actor in roles such as the stage manager in Thornton Wilder's Our Town at Ensemble Theater, Hickey in Eugene O'Neill's The Ice Band Cometh at DeBama, and the White Rabbit in Alice at the Palace at Playhouse Square, which garnered him a Cleveland Critics Circle Award. At Caesar's Forum, Ron was seen in Jean Ennuy's The Lark. Lee Mackey is the actress that Plain Dealer theater critic Tony Brown once called the legend in the Cleveland theater world. Her association with the Beck Center, formerly Lakewood Little Theater, spanned 33 years, with her husband Carl serving as managing director. Her stage work includes A.R. Gurney's Love Letters, D.L. Colburn's The Gin Game, and Marcia Norman's Night Mother. With Caesar's Forum, she's performed in Hugh Whitmore's Stevie, Carol Churchill's Blue Heart, and Samuel Beckett's All That Fall. Now, Sid and Imogene, in your vast career in Cleveland theater, you must have done an immense amount of shows together. So first, tell us exactly how many times you guys have performed together.
But I did that same show 3 times. Twice after we did the show, and 2 other times at different theaters.
And the show was the mornings at 7
Yes.
at the old JCC, done through the courtesy of the Ensemble Theater. And in it were, the headline said, on stage, something like 400 years of experience on the stage. And if you do the math, there was only like 8 in the cast. So we should have done it in wheelies and walkers. I don't know. But mornings at 7, and in it were Dorothy and Reuben Silver,
Right.
Mary Jane Nottage, Glenn Colwriter, good Glenn, Lucia Colombi,
Lucia
who
Colombi.
was then head of the ensemble, myself, and Lee Mackey.
Right.
And Larry Neary, he was the son, and Diane Bradley, I think, was his lover, or love interest.
Right.
Right, there we go.
Now, Lee, where were the other 2 theaters that you performed this show?
Oh, this show? I mean, the one we're
Mornings
talking
at 7,
about.
yes.
I did it at Berea Summer Theater, but I played a different part in that production. And then I played that again at Lakewood Little Theater, and I played a different part again. So I played 3 different parts in that show in different places.
Very good. And who directed you? Berea.
Where?
Berea.
Berea.
Oh, Berea, what's his name?
What's his name?
That's not
Neil Poole.
Yes.
Neil Poole.
Neil Poole, right.
Right. And he was just a student when I met him at Berea Summer Theater. That was in 1966 when I went there in a musical called Carnival. I played Jacques Cohen. And that started my lengthy run with Berea Summer Theater, all the way up until almost the time it closed in 2000 something. And Neil was a student. Also in the play was John Michael Tabalak, who later went on to Godspell fame, and you know the story on that. And my director was Joe Gehry. First time at Berea Summer Theater, and he was a professor at Cleveland State, along with Reuben Silver at that time. And at the time, later on, he was doing Jacques Brel there. And he asked Bill if he could do a performance of Jacques Brel. And this was in the 70s. At the same time he was going to do Jacques Brel, they were going to put the ball through the Palace and Playhouse Square. So, but except for Ray Shepardson, who was walking by one day, and he said, "Hey, wait a minute, you can't do that." And he walked into Playhouse Square, and he talked to somebody, the powers that be, and they stopped doing the Wrecking Ball. And then Ray was booking just talent and a lot of local funny comedy shows and sketches, the Budapest Hungarian Orchestra and all that sort of thing. And Joe went to him and said, I got a little project here. Why don't you come and see it and see if it'll fit in to Playhouse Square? So he came to Berea Summer Theater and he saw Jacques Brel is alive and well. And in it, of course, were Cliff Bemis, a student. He had graduated by then. Terry Pittio was a student at CSU. Prav Hollander, and all of you, dear Prav, and David Frazier. And Ray said, "Yeah, let's try it." So they moved it into the lobby of the State. And that's how it came, and ran for 2 years or something. People had seen it for like 60 or 70 times. And so in theater, things tend to go in circles. So what started way out in Berea came circle all the way downtown and ended up from that little theater in Berea to Playhouse Square, in which all of you hopefully attend up to this time in our lives.
And that little theater in Berea, that was started by a man named Bill Ullman.
Yes.
Yes.
And you were good friends with Bill Ullman, were you not?
Yes, I was. But he has skipped so much of my dialogue
We're going back.
that we're going to go back.
That's why I'm here. Just trust in James.
Lisa,
Okay, I
Lisa,
just
help me
wanted
out
to
here,
say-
would you please?
I
Oh,
have
thank you.
I have a story to tell about Eldred Theater.
Oh, I know that.
Yes, a college story.
Okay.
In college theater. They were doing a show called The Ascent of F6. F6 was the name of a mountain. And they always named the mountains by numbers so that they could identify them when they talked about them. But anyway, we were doing this show, Ascent of F6, and on stage, when the show opens, is a mother who's sitting in a rocking chair. Now, she sits in the rocking chair in the kitchen, and she talks about her son who climbs mountains. And then we have the mountain climber who climbs the mountains. Well, during the dark, a blackout in the theater, on stage, the curtain opens, the lights come on, and we have the mountain climber climbing the mountain, the mother sitting in the rocking chair on top of the mountain because she missed her cue. And he's coming up the mountain, and he comes up and he sees the mother. They ad-libbed, but I couldn't stop laughing. That was funny. But I want to also tell you that I'm of Polish descent. I'm 100% a Polak. And
Let's talk about that when you talk about how you got started in theater.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Because I
Need a
was
drink?
in theater when I was 5 years old, but I was speaking in Polish. And I enjoyed that so very, very much. So now we'll go back to, okay?
I guess so. So speaking of college theater, Berea Summer Theater,
Yes.
Yes. It was started by Bill Allman.
started by Bill Allman at Baldwin Wallace College.
Yes, but it wasn't the theater you see today.
Right,
When he
so-
started it in the mid-50s, the college dean or the president went to him and said, we wanted something for the community, through the summer in Berea, and not necessarily connected to the college, but we will fund it, and we don't necessarily want to make a profit, but we don't want a big loss. So Bill agreed to that, and he suggested that maybe some of the students could work the summer theater for credit. So he went down to Virginia or Kentucky and bought 2 Army barracks. He brought them back to Berea. He hooked them together, and the Berea Summer Theater started in the 2 Army barracks. I think it was Maple Street or something outside the con there. And one was the classroom, and the other was the theater. And that's how Bill started it, and of course it ran for a long time, all the way up to about 2000, and then unfortunately politics at the colleges took over. So that's my take on that. I won't go any farther.
But still an amazing story because, again, this little theater that started in an army barracks, originated the show that ended up saving Playhouse Square, essentially. So
To a sense, yeah.
pretty amazing story.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about how you got started in theater. And Lee, you talked about your Polish descent, so why don't you start?
My Polish,
Yeah, how did you get started in theater?
yeah, on the Polish stage. At any rate, I want to tell you about the STV players on the west side. The theaters on the west side, there was only 2, the STV players and Lakewood Little Theater. The east side had a lot of theaters, but there were only 2 on the west side. And it was kind of wonderful because theater, I don't know how to say this, but theater was not a way of life in those days. Little theaters were having trouble selling tickets and filling the houses, but eventually it all kind of came together. So the STV players, they did 3 shows a year, and they were doing shows for 6 years, and Carl Mackey was directing them. That was a very, very unusual situation. He also, after doing 6 shows at the STV players, they hired him at Lakewood Little Theater. So the poor guy was really overcome with rehearsals, but he finally quit the STV players and he kept the job at Lakewood Little Theater. I have to write these things down because I'm an elderly lady and I forget.
So,
Oh, okay, let me just say, in those days, there was the Cleveland Playhouse and there was the Hannah Theater. That was it for professional theater in Cleveland. Can you imagine only the Hannah Theater, and they had only shows that were coming in to Cleveland. They were professional shows, but they were all coming in. The Cleveland Playhouse, they paid their actors, and they had very few, so they did a lot of shows, and they had volunteer actors. They called them volunteers because they didn't pay them. Yeah, funny. Anyway, I'm through.
Okay, Brian, you want to order something or what?
Yes. Some more gin. Yeah. So that was great. That was a great story about Carl. Now, going back to your start as a little girl watching Polish theater, because you have a great story about that.
Well, I was 5 years old, and in those days, people didn't have things like babysitters. Never heard of a babysitter. So you took your kids with you, but you also threatened them if they misbehaved. At any rate, I saw Polish theater when I was 5 years old. My mother took me every year when they had shows, and I loved it. I just loved it. I loved the costumes they wore, the jewelry they wore. I loved the stories. I loved everything about it, and that was the time I decided I was going to be on stage. So that was it.
Well, that wasn't it though, because you continued in high school, correct?
Oh, yes. Well, I acted in high school. I went to college and I did plays in college. And I came back to Cleveland. I did plays in Cleveland. You know, there was a college downtown Cleveland. It was called, I can't remember.
It's okay.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was called.
Fenn?
Fenn College?
Cleveland College.
No.
Cleveland College?
It wasn't Fenn, because Fenn College was still off, away from Playhouse, away from the Cleveland's. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah, anyway, I wish I knew what it was called.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
But you took classes then?
I did.
Was it Western Reserve
Oh,
College?
yeah, I took classes.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I met my husband in a class, downtown Cleveland, a radio class. We were both interested in radio. Radio was very new, and we were both anxious to get jobs in radio. So we took this radio class. I never met him before. He sat next to me. And my girlfriend sat on the other side. I used to pass notes to her, and I'd get dirty looks from Carl Mackey. She'd pass a note to me, and she'd get a dirty look from Carl Mackey. But anyway, one day they said there was going to be a celebration of Shakespeare's plays in Cleveland, Ohio, downtown. Carl Mackey turned to me and he said, "Would you like to go to that?" And I said, "Sure." So after class, we decided we would have a date. He found out I lived on the west side, and he lived on the west side, and I lived on the east side. And there was no way he was gonna come pick me up. So we met under the clock at the Terminal Tower. And that was the beginning of our friendship.
Well,
Okay.
not just friendship. Right?
Right.
Now, what happened when you guys went to class the next time
Well,
after your date?
Yeah, we had this date. We didn't go to Shakespeare's celebration. We went to a movie. It was raining. We crossed the street. Our feet got wet. We got wet. Carl took me to the bus stop. Oh, no, they didn't have buses in those days.
Streetcar.
Streetcars. He took me to the streetcar and waited for me till I got on the streetcar. And so the next day I went to class. Carl Mackey wasn't there. The second day I went to class, Carl Mackey wasn't there. The third day I went to class, and I thought he left town. But it turned out he had, poor thing, he had pneumonia. And that's how we began our first relationship.
And as they know, this led to a wonderful marriage. Now, Ron, you didn't marry Carl, but you did know him from...
Yeah, well, he never asked. I mean, never even wrote. I mean, no coffee, flowers, anything. I mean, why would I marry him?
You didn't marry Carl, but you did know him from your days at Howard's, right?
Yes.
And this is also where you got your start in acting.
Yes. Okay. When I graduated, I had no idea that I wanted to be in theater, any of that stuff. In elementary school back then, and the old West High School, there was nothing about theater, so no teachers weren't interested in it. Nobody took us to any place, a movie. I did go to movies, 5 cents. I sat all day in the theater. So we got through high school. Me and my buddy came out, and he lived next door to me. We owned the house, and it was a double side by side. One day, his name was Richard, Dick Eben. He comes out to me and he says, "Ron, I got an idea." His mother and dad were in vaudeville, and we used to love the stories about vaudeville. And he comes over and he says, "Hey, Ron," and I said, "Yeah, okay. What? He said, "Why don't we take tap dancing lessons?" And I didn't know what that was at the time. I said, what are you talking about, tap dancing? He said, "Tap dancing, with the feet, tap." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well," he said, I thought maybe, my folks are in vaudeville, they tell all these great stories. I thought we could become a dance team and bring back vaudeville." And I said, "Vaudeville's been dead for 32 years. And he says, "It doesn't matter. So, okay, I agreed. I don't know why I agreed. But I did. We went down to Marjorie Sherman's dance studio, which was above the old Channel 8 on Euclid Avenue, around 18th or 17th or something like that. And there we were, two guys, 17 years old, standing in the back of a tap class of all small children. And all the mothers were out there like you are. And we're tapping away, and I'm looking at Richard, and I said, "Are they looking at us or what?" Because we were looking down, because the kids were smaller than we were looking down, but they thought we were looking at the kids, but we were really looking at their feet, so we knew what the hell step to do. So anyway, we finished that, and as soon as we went through that all summer, and I loved it, and my first stage appearance, not my theater career, but my stage appearance, was in a dance recital at the Hannah Theater, the legitimate stage. So, I had, in my youth, my grandmother pinned an accordion on me. I played the accordion. My mother was an artist. My uncle was a great artist. And so I knew music, and I knew a little bit of dance and all that stuff. So anyway, I had to play the accordion and tap dance at the same time, which I did. And then she put us into a By the Sea number. By the sea, by the sea, by the beautiful sea. But we had to be women. So they dressed us up in these long bloomers and the beach hats, whatever they wore, swimwear, back in the 20s or even before that. And we tapped By the Sea, by the sea. I think I had a red wig on and this hat. So my first stage appearance was in drag. So anyway, then, unfortunately, Uncle Sam dragged my ass to Korea. Spent 2 years in Korea in the war. Came back out of the war. But I liked tap dancing. I took to it like a duck to water. So I applied. I didn't have any job. I was just floating around. And I had my money getting out of the Army, and I went to Fred Astaire Studios. And I went in, and I paid for some dance lessons, some ballroom lessons. And I was pretty good. So they said, do you want to teach? So I did. And I taught ballroom dancing. But they also had a tap dancing class. Yay! And the gentleman that was teaching the class, his name was Bob Audie. Well, Bob Audie turned out to be, he went to New York, and he taught the stars how to tap dance. And he didn't choreograph. That wasn't his beat. He just wanted to teach dancing. And so Shirley MacLaine, any Broadway star that had to dance a musical, had to go to Bob for lessons. So anyway, I was floating around, looking for a job. I wanted to be in television. I couldn't get a job in television because what experience was Catch-22, which we did at Dobama, a terrible show. Sorry, Joyce. But anyway, I just walked into Hallie's one day and I said, is there any openings? And they said, oh yeah, go up to the employment office. I went to the employment office and they said, there's an opening in the display department. I said, okay, I'll take it. I had no idea what I was doing. I went up to the display department and they said, you're going to be in windows. You're going to do the windows displays. I said, oh, okay, thank you. But your first day on the job, I said, I want you to go to the balcony and I want you to help Shirley paint scenery. Scenery, I said, what? I didn't know what that was at the time. And they said, we do scenery, big backdrops for the windows, and he's painting them up there. I walked up, a little gentleman, full of white hair, beautiful beard, in a t-shirt, painting scenery. And he said, can I help you? And I said, well, I'm looking for Shirley. I'm supposed to help her paint. He said, I'm Shirley. His name was Shirley Braithwaite, and his family was from England and all the way back to Shakespeare's time. He was a wonderful man. I loved him. He was my father figure, and he was my mentor. And that's how I started into theater, painting, and designing. I watched that man paint. It was incredible. And everything I learned, and you see today, is what I learned from him. So I did that. I went down to lunch one day, and an employment lady comes in. She says, to all the gentlemen, you and you stop in the employment office on the way. So what did we do? I just started. I haven't been there a month. So they went in, and this guy hands me a script, and he says, read. I said, read what? I said, what is this? He said, well, it's called a script, and I want you to read Mr. Cherry, who is a 70-year-old man who drinks, who hides his booze in a tree. And the name of the show was The Silver Whistle. And I said, okay, I did. And the gentleman who gave me that was Richard Oberlin, who was an actor at the Cleveland Playhouse, and they weren't making enough money in those days. The union wasn't very strong, so most of them had worked out in the community making a couple of bucks. I got the part, I loved it, and that started me on my theater career. Then they said at Christmas time, now I always wanted to be in television for some reason, I don't know. They said, go down to the 7th floor lounge, help Joe Brown, who was in special events, with the half-hour remote show of the Mr. Jingling Show. So, I was now in television, helping out. And that was the first year of Mr. Jingling. And of course, those of you that know who he is, a little character, who...
And guess who was Mr. Jingling?
Yes.
After the first Mr. Jingling died? Carl Mackey.
Yay! It's a circle, folks. It's a circle. That's true, right. And so I started. And after Max Ellis died, they had an audition. Earl Keyes was at Channel 5 at the time, and he directed the first remote. But then he went back to Channel 5 after that.
Well, he got fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, from 5, I guess, I don't. Anyway, Max Ellis, who was an actor at the Playhouse, making a couple of bucks, was the first Mr. Jingling. 5-minute shows on Captain Penny at 5:55 weekdays. He passed away. They had auditions. Carl got one, and he did what? How long did he play it?
Oh, he only played it for one season because they wanted him to do afternoon shows and evening shows at department stores as Mr. Jingling. Now, Carl Mackey had a full-time job at Lakewood Little Theater, and he couldn't do that. So after the first season of Mr. Jingling, he quit. He told them he couldn't do the afternoon and evening, so he left the job open, and
Earl took over, and
Yeah.
Earl took over in around 64,
yeah,
and so I spent every Christmas with Mr. Jingling. The year I got to Halley's was 1956. After Halley's closed in 82, we took it to Higbee's. I was with them through that. I was with them a little bit after Higbee's closed, when he went sort of, he got very, very ill. And but interesting about somebody who plays a character that long, when you're that long into a character, you become that character in a sense. And Earl started to do that very early, I remember. Sometimes like in May or something like that. But you watched him as he put on his makeup, he'd start to morph into this little man in the green suit with the little tufts of hair and with the bald pate that he put on, because that's the way the character was generated by the Jacoby Advertising Agency in Chicago. Mr. Jingling's birthplace was Chicago. And Mr. Halley and them were friends, and he said, I got this little character that'll help you through, do your Christmas holiday season, and they agreed with a handshake. And so between shows at Higbee's was on the 10th floor, and the dressing rooms were in the back, and if you opened the windows, you could see all the way down to the front of the terminal tower. But also in the terminal tower were what were they, peregrines that lived up there, the little hawk-like birds? So Mr. Jingling, with the bald pate and the little fuzzy sides like wings, it was sweaty. Takes his bald pate off, puts it on the windowsill. And we're talking, and Earl's doing this and that, and all of a sudden Earl says, well, it's time, showtime, and he looks and the wig's gone. The wind had took the wig and blew it up in the air. The peregrine came down, grabbed it, and it was in his nest. So Earl had to redo his, get his own hair. Anyway, somewhere up in the terminal tower is Mr. Jingling's wig. But Earl had his, he had a lot of idiosyncrasies. If Earl went up in a line when we were doing the Christmas shows and all the little characters were on stage, and he forgot his words because his memory started to go, he would recite in German. He'd just stand there and spout German. And then he says, okay, that's all I got to say, what about you? And he walks off stage. So he gathers himself, and they have to ad lib till he gets back on. But sort of a story that's hung with me many years, and I bring it up only because he was a dear man to me, and I went over to visit him in Beanie after Higbee's had closed and when he was ill, and I went in August just to see how they were doing, and Earl at this time was very feeble. And I said, we went in, she gave me coffee, she was a lovely woman, and we sat, and I said, where's Earl? And he said, I think maybe you better go up and see him, because they had taken over the character, and then they would do some bookings for parties and children's parties and all that stuff. Earl would get done. And I said, I think you better go up, and I did. This was August. And there was Earl in the Jingling outfit. Wow. And I said, Earl, what are you doing? And he said, well, we got to go to the party. And I said, well, you're not booked until November. And he said, oh, well, I got to get ready. And, so that's, it was, it was those years the years at Halley's, three things in my life that are very dear to me and shape my life. One is when I was growing up, I lived with three women, my mother and her two sisters, and early on my grandmother, who swore like a sailor. But not me. And they shaped my life early on, especially my mother. Everything I am today is through Mom. And what you see on stage, what you see in design and everything else. The second was the war. I grew up really good. I learned discipline, confidence in myself and all that. And the third was Hallie's. I would not be here if it wasn't for the Hallie. All of my training, all of my work in theater, all of my artwork, my design work, what I do in television, my writings, all started in a department store in Cleveland, Ohio. And, that's it.
Now, Lee, after Carl left Jingling at Hallie's, he was busy with Lakewood Little Theater, as you mentioned, but he still had time to do commercials, radio, and television work, especially during the summer,
Yes.
which is how he became involved in the Johnny McQueen show.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Johnny McQueen show?
I can tell you a little bit about it. I can tell you a lot about it.
All right.
It took a lot of his time. As a matter of fact, he won the audition to get the part, and they sold it to a car dealer, and Johnny McQueen would drive around Cleveland in different kind of cars. That was the whole point that the car dealers thought was the important thing in the show. So Carl drove around first in one car and then another and then another. And it was a great series, but the man who wrote it committed suicide. The first show that happened, he did it before the show started, and he committed suicide. Unfortunately, Carl Mackey was a director and an actor, so they offered Carl, they said, you've got to direct and be the star, and he said, okay. So it was a busy, 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 busy summer with Carl doing both things for that show.
Should we give some background? That was the first episodic television show ever shot in Cleveland.
Yes, it was.
It was produced by Channel 5.
Yeah.
So it was a half-hour detective series that was mirrored after all of the radio detective shows that had been done prior to that. And so, sorry, I just felt like
okay.
Open
Thank
house.
you,
Yep.
kind lady.
It's her daughter. Kind lady.
Whom Lee has no idea who she is. And they were planning on taking the show national.
Yes, but the car dealers here in Cleveland thought that the show was too expensive because they didn't expect that much coverage and they didn't expect that much income coming out. So they canceled the show after the first season. So Carl was out, but that's okay. It took a lot of time.
And he still had Lakewood Little Theater, which
Oh, yes. He
I'd
had-
like to talk about now, because now you were quite an accomplished actress at the time that Carl was managing director at Lakewood Little Theater, but I heard that you were not allowed to audition for any shows there.
Well, I'll tell you, when they hired Carl Mackey, they said, he said yes, and they agreed on a price. And then they said, we understand your wife is an actress. And he said, oh, yes, she's a very good one. They said, well, you can't cast her in any show. And Carl said, what? And they said, no, we had a director who used to cast his sweetie in all the parts, and so we can't have that again. Carl said, I'm not gonna cast my sweetie in all the parts. But they said, no, you can't do that. So it was about 6 years before I ever got a chance to be in a show at Lakewood Ohio. But that was okay. I did everything else. I was so good. I was Carl Mackey's assistant, only I didn't get paid. That was life.
But what happened when the actresses that got hired called off sick?
Oh, well, see, I didn't get parts, but I did get to replace people who were sick on a bad night. First of all, when Carl Mackey called me at home and said, Josie just called, she's sick, she can't perform tonight, come down. So I went down, I went up to the dressing room, I checked her clothes, make sure that I could fit in them, because if I couldn't fit in them, I'd have to find someone to find me something to wear, while I memorized her part. That was tough. Those were very busy days. Somebody went out and would buy me dinner, I would eat dinner, I would learn lines, it was kind of fun, but it was very, very strenuous. And when I got pregnant, I had to find my grandmother, Lisa's grandmother, to come and babysit because I couldn't stay home and I couldn't take her with me. But anyway, that was life at Lakewood Little Theater.
And now, when did you finally get to perform in a show at the theater?
Well, okay, they finally were doing a show called The Lark, and it was about Joan of Arc. I thought I would like to try out for that. So I went to auditions. Carl saw me and he said, what are you doing here? And I said, I came to audition. He said, what part? I said, Joan of Arc. Well, anyway, he was so afraid that people would criticize him if he cast me because I was the best.
Goes without saying.
That he kept auditioning women. They would call and he'd say, okay, come on down and audition. The show was already started in rehearsals and he still didn't have a Joan of Arc. But finally he said, go ahead. And you know what I heard around town? Carl Mackey cast his wife as Joan. So when I went, I had to get my hair cut the way Joan did. So I went to a barber in the neighborhood and I told him I needed to get a haircut. So he started to tell me about this terrible thing that happened at Lakewood Little Theater. He said, they were casting for Joan of Arc. He said, what a good part. He said, and you know what? They cast his wife. And I said, really? So then he said, yeah, that was terrible. He cast his wife after all of that. He said, well, he said, what kind of haircut do you want? I said, Joan of Arc kind of haircut. That was it. I did Joan of Arc, and I want to tell you, our little girl was about 5 years old.
I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And I grew up in theater. I understood that it was make-believe. I was in the light booth watching the first performance. And when they burned Joan at the stake, I started screaming. I was convinced that that had actually happened. My father would take me backstage and show me that she was still alive.
See how good the shows at Lakewood were?
Now I want to go back to Halle Brothers for a minute, Ron. Back in Halle's heyday, there were many celebrities that made personal appearances in the store. So,
Yes.
did you have any favorite celebrities that you met while you were working?
Zsa Zsa.
Zsa Zsa Gabor.
Zsa Zsa Gabor. After I was in display, and then I got into what they call special events, which was designing outside activities. I was still designing the animated windows at Christmas time, and so I would do the outside fashion shows at Severance Hall for the women's committees and all of that. And then all of the PAs, personal appearances of celebrities that came in for books, or they had a new line of hats, Mr. John, and or a new line of clothing or cosmetics and all that sort of stuff. We had Cary Grant, Bob Hope, Liberace, and none of them are what you see on the screen or on television when you see them in person. Totally drawn in, except Hope. No, Hope was Hope. But anyway, around '67, we got sold to Marshall Fields, and at the same time, Zsa Zsa Gabor came out with a line of cosmetics for women. So we immediately jumped on that and said, we will take your line and put it on our main floor. And they said, also, we will throw you a cocktail party. Okay? So they call out to the coast, and everybody agrees that there's a cocktail party on a certain night at Halle Brothers, and Zsa Zsa will appear. Okay, so all that's set up. One day, in comes a little tiny little man in a tight little suit and sweats. So this little man in a tight suit that sweats says, I am the front man for Zsa Zsa. Because they all had front men that came in. And his job was to make sure that the room in the Hotel Statler, which was right across the street from Halle's, was set up exactly like her bedroom in Hollywood. So they couldn't do it exactly, but so he sweating, the suit's getting out of it, terrible. But anyway, we said, okay, we'll do this and we'll make the arrangements. So we start working on the cocktail party. At that time, department stores were much different than you got now, folks. I mean, we threw cocktail parties and carried people out of there. It was wonderful. That was beautiful. And I loved every drop of it. But, and anyway, so we got together and we gathered, and we said, okay, how's she coming here? What's the entrance? How's she going to enter the store? And we talked around, and I said, why don't we call the skinny little man in the suit that sweats a lot? So we did. And he said, well, she does not want to come through the main floor. We already had the red carpets. She doesn't want to come through the glass doors or any of that. She wants to come in unannounced in an entrance that nobody can see her. And we're sitting there, and we think, we only have one, and that's the freight elevator. And the freight elevator was in an alley between 9th and Halle Brothers, Halle's alley that goes across from the Statler. And as you go halfway down, you turn to the right, there's the freight elevator. And on one side is a graffitied brick wall, and on the other side are all the dumpsters and the smells and the dirt from the backs of restaurants, et cetera, and you can So anyway, the day comes, and we said, okay, how are we going to get her here? And we said, well, maybe she can walk across the street. It's only like 50 feet. No, not walking. Not walking, no. So how about a taxi? A little taxi, it'll drive 100 feet. She gets out and gets in. No, she has a limo. Well, if you know Halle's Alley, you can barely walk down it or barely get a car through from Euclid to Huron Road. So we're all watching, and we're standing there, like dignitaries in the front of Halle's Alley. We see a limo come around 12th Street Park. We see this vision in black come out with a black veil, get into the limo, come through the light right down Halle's Alley, and stops at the entrance to the freight going to the freight elevator. And we go there and we run to the door and we start to open. No, I don't want to get out here. I do not want to walk from here to the freight elevator. Again, 20 feet. So He goes, go all the way to Huron Road, all the way around 9th Street, and come down through the alley in this. There was no way to turn that limo into the alley. No way. So he drives all the way down and parks it right next to the freight elevator. So when you open the door, there's the freight elevator with the graffiti wall, all of the garbage, and at that time of night, at 6 o'clock at night, there's usually a small wind. There's a haze of dirt and everything blowing through. It's like a wind tunnel, is what it is. So I go to the door, and it was my job to open the door for her and give her a hand, and this veil pops out, the head, and at that same time the wind picks it up and blows it into her eyelashes. And she's shouting these obscenities in Hungarian. I had no idea. Meanwhile, I'm there, the little man, the tight little man with the tight little suit that sweats a lot, is over here. I'm here, and Dixie Davis, the fashion designer, and we're doing hand jive around the veil, like this. 6 hands were going crazy, like, and she's shouting, no, 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 no. Like this, this. So then we each take a side of the veil. I'm on this side, Dixie's on this side, he's in the front, and we lift it off of her eyelashes, and she's perfect. Woman is a vision. She doesn't need makeup. And she said, thank you. She shook my hand. Thank you. In Hungarian, I have no what she said to me. And anyway, she walks to the steps, and these wooden steps have been there for almost 50 years. They're broken. The dirt on the is oil, and she proudly walks up, guide her up. But meanwhile, I had to decorate that freight elevator. They said, you got to decorate that freight. I said, you can't put her in here. I mean, it's metal, it's tin. So I went down to the rug department and got a Karastan rug, which was worth about $6,000. Put it on the floor. Went to the fabric department and got the most expensive fabric and silk and satins you could. Lined it, hung it up there with cupids with magnets. So she's draped all the way around. There were torches. I had to get torches from the lamp department. These torches were here. I had to get 2 palms, and the palms were there next to the torches. And I had to go get a little Louis XIV chair. Put it in the middle. And I stood back and I said, this is absurd. We got a graffiti wall, we got 10 dumpsters with garbage, we got dirt blowing down the alley, and we got this picture in a freight elevator. And she gets out and she looks at it and she goes, oh, thank you. Walks in and sits down. And it's a picture I will never forget. And at that time, the old elevators were these metal doors. So first comes down the wire. Wham. She's sitting there, now she looks like she's in prison. And then these 2 doors come wham, and up she goes. And we all go up to the 3rd floor, and she walks out magnificent. And she was my favorite. She was. Oh, Jaja was a good thing. I got a letter from her, too.
That's a great story, and those were.
What did she say in the letter?
It was in Hungarian. How the hell do I know? Nice feed. Nice setup, Lee. Thank you.
Those were all amazing stories you guys have told. Now we're all fortunate for Halle Brothers because in a way they gave many Cleveland actors a career.
Oh, yes.
Including Ron and Lee, who have become such important fixtures in the Cleveland theater community.
Yeah. Well, Carl Mackey worked for Halle Brothers
Right.
when he was working.
He was a floor walker
there.
in the main. I remember him. Very tall, very dignified man. He always wore the same suit, but he always.
That's all he had.
I wasn't going to say that. And a white shirt, a beautiful tie, and some polished shoes, always polished. But the shirt looked immaculate.
Yes.
Is there?
Was it?
And I want to tell you why. Carl Mackey had to wear a white shirt when he was a floor man at Halle's. So sometimes I was working and sometimes I didn't have time to iron everything. So one day I met Carl after work where he was working at Halle's. I met him after work so we could go have dinner together. And he was wearing this wonderful ironed shirt under his jacket. And I said, wow, what happened to your shirt? He said, I ironed it. And I said, wow, that's wonderful. Well, we ate dinner, we went home, he took off his jacket, and the shirt was ironed here, here. But it made it. Life is fun, isn't it?
Life is fun. I wanted to kind of close things by saying that I've been fortunate enough to work with both Ron and Lee. Ron directed me in a show called Fuddy Mears at Debama, where I played a 17-year-old pot-smoking 8th grader. And then we also worked together as actors in The Lark for Caesar's Forum. I've shared the stage with Lee a couple of times in Samuel Beckett's All That Fall, and most recently, just 2 years ago, in Peter Weiss's The Investigation, both for Caesar's Forum.
Yeah.
So I've been lucky to work with and learn from some of the most experienced and talented actors in Cleveland theater. Before we go, I want to thank Ron and Lee for sharing their amazing stories with us today. And thank you all for coming out and listening to them and for your support of Caesar's Forum.
Yeah.
Speaking of supporting Caesar's Forum, there are many ways that you can do that.
Oh, commercial.
Yes. One of them being our upcoming show, Plath and Orion, 2 one-act plays. Lanford Wilson's The Great Nebula in Orion, and an original Greg Caesar play called Plath, Sexton, and the Art of Confession, which will be performed September 21st through October 27th at Kennedy's in Playhouse Square. There are flyers on the table, so please get tickets now. You can also support us at any time by writing a tax-free donation and leaving that with Bobby up front. So thank you again for coming out this afternoon and listening to the Cleveland Theater Stories. Take a bow, Lee.
Oh, we're talking about?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Finally late.